Okay, Boker Tov, everybody, and Shavua Tov. I don't know if I should begin with Shachiyanu V'Kivanu V'Gil L'Zman Hazeh, but this is the first in-person program we've done in 3 years. And the last, since our last program, February of 2020, we have about 1,400 classes on Zoom, Baruch Hashem, and hundreds of thousands of people have come, but this is the first time we're back live at a program. So I want to thank you for coming in person. And of course, I want to thank Ellie and Renee Rubinstein who are sponsoring our program this morning. So last week, NAOMI told me that it's Sarah Scheniner's yahrzeit was today. I had no idea, and you had no idea when we thought of the program. Nobody looked at the Hebrew date. I don't know when Sarah Scheniner's yahrzeit is. But then we told me last week it's Sarah Scheniner's yahrzeit. Amazing. And then Renee called me last week when she saw the program that it's her mother's yahrzeit, and she would like to sponsor the program with her sister, Braunstein, in memory, לעילוי, נשמת, מרים, ומנחם, Mendel. And her mother was a student, Magda Reichner, was a student of in Bais Yaakov in Bratislava, which was established by Chava Landsburg, who was a student of Sara Schenirer. So I think bring it all together. Thank you. Should have good memories, long life. Then Sham should have an aliyah. Thank you very much for your support over all the years of Torah Motion. Thank you very much. What I'll briefly do, since we have 3 speakers and each are speaking for a relatively short amount of time, and we'll have a question and answer period, I'll briefly introduce all 3 speakers now. We won't have to do in the middle. Dr. NAOMI SEIDMAN is the Chancellor, Jack Professor of Arts in the Department of Study of Religion and the Center of Diaspora and Transnational Studies at the University of Toronto. Is there like a short version? She's a professor at the University of Toronto.
That's the short.
She's a professor at the University of Toronto. She's a alumnus of Bais Yaakov of Borough Park, and has spent the last number of years, many years, really becoming the world's expert on the history of Bais Yaakov. Her book, Sara Schenirer and Bais Yaakov, Movement, A Revolution in the Name of Tradition, was published in 2019 by Lytton Library, and she won the National Jewish Book Award in Movement Studies, and it's really a pleasure for Chanie. We've had her speak on Zoom actually, and it's really a pleasure to meet in person. So thank you very much. Our second speaker, who is a research assistant with Dr. NAOMI, is JUNI, who is a graduate of Bais Yaakov in Toronto, and also Midrash at Birnbaum in Israel, and is now a second-year student of philosophy and English literature at the University of Toronto, and working as a research assistant on the Bais Yaakov Project. So, pleasure to have you. Thank you very much. And our third speaker, Dr. KALMAN WEISER, is a Silver Family Professor of Modern Jewish Studies and Director of the Israel and Gold Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University. He's a graduate of Yale and Columbia. He's author of numerous books. He'll be speaking on Yiddish in the archives, so I'll mention his book, Jewish People, Yiddish Nation, Noah Kruluki. That's my Yiddish. And the book list in Poland won the 2000 Canadian Jewish Book Award for scholarship, and it's a pleasure to have everybody here. That's enough introduction. Dr. SEIDMAN,
Thank you so much. Thank you to Rabbi J. KALMAN, fellows Lushatner, right?
Yes.
We both
we can sing Komakane.
Right. We both know the same tune for Komakane, but we're not going to sing it now. Not yesterday or 2 days ago. And who else? Thank you for coming. I actually know a few people here, especially thank you to the Birnbaum family, the lovely, amazing Birnbaum family. We'll be hearing a lot more about them mostly from KALMAN. And thank you to Renee and Eli Rubinstein for sponsoring this. And who am I forgetting, KALMAN? Thank you to KALMAN for driving me. Thank you to CHAYA for working so hard with me till I think it was 1:45 midnight on Thursday night. So I don't have so much time. You know what it means when a Jewish studies professor takes off her watch? Nothing. Sorry, it's an old one. Sorry to everybody who's heard all my shtick before. Hear it again, as my father used to say. So I'm going to be introducing this project. I wrote a book called Sarah Schenirer and the Bais Yaakov movement that came out in 2019. And apparently I'm not done. Apparently, I'm not done with Bais Yaakov. It was, since then, I've gotten a research grant from the Canadian, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. This is where you break into Canada. One of the amazing things about being a Canadian professor as opposed to being an American professor is that there's a lot more research funding from the government. I don't know if you know this. So there's more money to play with, and one of the things, and I'll talk about what it is that I'm doing with the Bais Yaakov and Bais Yaakov Project. But as Rabbi KALMAN said, today is Sarah Scheniner's yahrzeit. And I'll start by talking about how I got involved in this research project to begin with, which goes back to 2010. So in 2010, I used to teach in actually a Christian divinity school in Berkeley, California. And I was in Krakow for the Jewish Culture Festival with a group of about 8 students. And I was in the courtyard of the Ramah synagogue. Some of you know this amazing, I think, 16th century synagogue, and it's still intact in Krakow. And I saw a bunch of Bais Yaakov girls, and dressed like Bais Yaakov girls. They didn't recognize me, but I could tell a Bais Yaakov girl a mile off. And I said, "What are you in town for the festival?" And they said, "Actually, we're here to visit the grave of the woman who started our school system." And I said, "Oh, Sara Schenirer is buried in Krakow?" I should have known, but I didn't. And they looked at me like, "You know who Sara Schenirer is?" And of course I know who Sara Schenirer is. And as I was walking back to my hotel, I bumped into Yaacov, who's the director of the Jewish Culture Festival. Has anyone ever been to the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow? It's the most amazing Jewish thing you've ever seen, and it's run by a non-Jew named Yaacov. She's been doing it since basically since the Soviet era. And he said, "Are you having a good time?" And I said, "I just bumped into a group of these Orthodox teenagers, and they're here pilgrimage to this woman's. Do you know anything about this? I mean, do you know that there's these Orthodox girls coming through Krakow on their way probably between the seminary in Israel and, their homes in Brooklyn, most of them." And he said, "No, I had no idea. Do you want to give a talk about it at the festival next year?" And of course I did, right? Like, I wanted to be on the inside of the festival, not on the outside of the festival. So I spent a year trying to find out about this pilgrimage practice, which was a new pilgrimage practice since I myself was a Bais Yaakov girl. And I gave the talk, and there was someone in the audience who gave me her card, Connie Weber. She said, "You should write a book." So I wrote a book, but I'm still not done, as I said. So that's how this all started. And for those of you who don't know, this is the image of Sara Schenirer, the founder of Bais Yaakov. How many people went to Bais Yaakov here? Yeah. So you're probably, when I started to write the book, this picture was not known. Sara Schenirer famously did not want her photograph circulated, and this is a picture that was in the Krakow archive. It's a application for her ID card, and I wanted to respect her wishes, but also I'm a historian, and also I do these shows. So the compromise that I gave myself is that I do her picture very small. And this is the picture that circulated with her permission. It's the frontispiece of her collected writings that came out in 1933. So this, I feel okay showing you a little larger. And this is, the famous, amazing growth of the Bais Yaakov system. And I'll just point out that it wasn't until February of 1925 that this movement was actually taken over by the Agudas Yisrael, the World Organization of Orthodox Jews. So until 1925, let's say 40 schools or more put together by one woman, basically on her own, with the help of a few local Aguda people. So this is a quite astonishing story. Talk a lot more about this, but time is short. So this is my favorite map until the map that I'm going to tell you about. So this map was done in 1931, and it's a map that was, I love these old maps. I think that's the main reason I'm in this business, is because I love old maps. But this map was put together by a group of visiting good administrators from Central Europe, Austria and Germany, mostly. And they came, there's a picture of them on the top right. They came to visit the system and also to visit the Chava and just to a tour of Eastern Europe, which they were supporting a lot of institutions in this part of the world. And this picture was produced during this tour. By this point, Bais Yaakov was already an international movement. There were this many schools, whatever that is, in, you can see there, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Renee's mother, right, went to the seminary in Bratislava, which I think was founded in 1936.
And she was there in 1939, like really right before the war. It's unbelievable.
And my mother was so by the time, so I'll just give a little detour here, which is that by this era, by 1931, there were already 2 seminaries, teacher seminaries in this system. And one was the main one in Krakow, which had its own building by 1931, which still is standing. And the other one was in Vienna, which didn't have its own building. And by 1935-36, there were already, there was one in Bratislava and there was one in Czernowitz. My mother went to the one in Czernowitz. Your mother went to the one in Bratislava. And one reason I wanted to show you this map, other than I love it, is that one of the things that we're spending your tax money on is that we're producing a map of all the Bais Yaakovs in the world ever, from the beginning till now, and it'll be a kind of map where you can click on 1929, see all the schools in 1929, click on the school that your mother went to or grandmother, and see who was the principal there, any photographs we have, etc. And the other thing, and this requires people traveling all around the world. CHAYA is just one of, it's like I'm running a little business. CHAYA is just one of the people employed by me. I have another one, if anyone knows him, Marinka Yosifon, who's a Spanish speaker, who's in Buenos Aires right now. There are 5 Bais Yaakovs in Buenos Aires. So this is what we're doing. And this was supposed to be year 1 of the grant, and that was like 3 years ago. And we're about to unroll this map, but it's not quite ready yet. There were Bais Yaakovs in Uruguay. There were Bais Yaakovs. We're finding everyone that ever existed. The oldest Bais Yaakov in the world, more or less continuously running with a little. Anyone know? What? No, Braunstein is 1937, 1934, Antwerp. Did I say Bais Yaakov was it started as you said in 1896, became a Bais Yaakov in 1934, is still a Bais Yaakov now. We have since I went to Antwerp. Bais Yaakov Journal, and there's Oriel Birnbaum's beautiful what's it called? Ink? What is it? Ink drawing, which I found, which was probably not an illustration for Bais Yaakov, but I did find it illustrating some Bais Yaakov publications. Bais Yaakov, by the way, was the largest independent, non-public school system in interwar Poland. So it was larger than Tarbut or Sisho or the secular ones, etc. So it was the largest one, and it was only a girls' school. So if you can see how that's really significant. The Bais Yaakov Journal is the longest running Yiddish women's. There were quite a few women's journals, magazines, etc. The Bais Yaakov Journal came out in, I think, 150 something issues between 1923 and 1939. Even before Bais Yaakov was taken over by the Aguda, it was kind of adopted by a young Aguda activist named Gershon Friedenson, who was the editor-in-chief.
Right.
His son was Yosef Friedenson. Okay, I realize this is real inside baseball. There's people here who know all these names, and the rest of you, they're just Jewish names going in and out of your ears. Okay, so what am I doing now that the book is done? So one of the things I'm doing, along with all the other crazy things that we're doing, is in the archives, in the Evo archive, I don't think it's in the Birnbaum archive, is a songbook from 1931 that has a bunch of Bais Yaakov songs from the interwar period, including the notes. And we're making a record. I know that's so 1990, but we're making a record of Bais Yaakov music. Basi Schefter, another graduate of Bais Yaakov Borough Park, who's a musician. We were just planning it on the phone a couple of days ago. Now is a good time for me to say that we're also having a conference tomorrow. If this isn't enough for you, a 2-day conference, international people coming from Poland, America, Israel, 18 people, and it's going to be 2 days of presentations about Bais Yaakov, and on Monday at 5:30, you can also zoom in. We're going to have a concert of Bais Yaakov Bais Yaakov music, and because Kolisha and all that, the singers you're going to see are all kind of like ex-Bais Yaakov people. But one of these days we'll get a bunch of actually still Bais Yaakov inside people, and we'll have an all-women's concert, right? CHAYA. So the other thing that I'm doing is we're focusing on. So one of the things that took a very little space in my book was the Bais Yaakov play. And the Bais Yaakov play, it seems like, okay, very nice. I'm realizing what a big deal the Bais Yaakov play is, that it's not a small extracurricular activity. For anyone, all the people here who went to Bais Yaakov, you know what a big deal it is, right? Production. So one of the things I discovered is that the production goes way back. The first, we have a production.
No.
Don't leave like that.
Sorry.
Better to see that than me.
That one's gonna be on.
Better to see these old people. So, these are Bais Yaakov plays from the 20s and 30s. It was already a huge deal, by which I mean, in the Jewish newspapers, Sara Schenirer plays 1920 in advertisement. I tried to get an image of it. Her first play was Yiddishism, which is significant for those of you who know Bais Yaakov history, because she had her great revelation to start Bais Yaakov at Rabbi Moshe David Flesh's Stumpfergast Shul in Vienna on Shabbos Hanukkah when he was giving a sermon about Yiddishism. Her first play was about the extra-biblical character of Yiddishism. Yiddishism was a great smash hit in the Bais Yaakov circuit. Why wouldn't it be a smash hit? You get to, at one point, Yiddishism walks out with, what's his name, Holoformus' head, holding it by the hair, though the actual beheading takes place off stage. And instead of him, like, coming on to her, it's almost like a shidduch scene, because it's a Bais Yaakov play. So Sarah Schenirer herself wrote 6 plays, and there are many other people writing plays. If you come, we're going to have an exhibit in the rare book room of Birnbaum material, but also Bais Yaakov material. We have Chana, we have a play, Chana and Her 7 Sons by Sarah Schenirer, also a copy of the script, so you get to see that. And this is still, so one of the reasons why I like to show this, first of all, this is, I think, one of the most beautiful photographs of the interwar period. And this is the Bais Yaakov of Buchach. And there are people, this is a Hanukkah play. What's interesting is why Bais Yaakov so often did Hanukkah plays as opposed to Purim plays. It's a whole other story I won't get into, but this I think actually is a Purim play. This is Munkach, by the way.
Oh, Munkach.
For any Munkachers out there. But Buchach, it happened to be my father's hometown. And my book is dedicated to my aunt who died in the Holocaust of murder. Let's not use euphemisms here. And she was a Bais Yaakov teacher in Buchach, and we never had a photo of her. And this, I do not actually know whether that's my aunt I was just pointing out this poster from 1926. A Bais Yaakov production, even in the 1920s, involved renting a movie theater or getting, these were not little school plays. And what you see here on the right is Bais Yaakov productions today. Some of them, I don't know how many of you know that there's a whole Orthodox women's film industry, where these are, which is why there's no images of, there's no faces on those posters. That's how kosher they are. Which, by the way, the taboo against showing women's faces didn't exist in interwar period, which is one of the things you learn if you do a little history. But anyway, right, Chaya? So, this is the this is part of my new. What I'm trying to do is trace the history of Bais Yaakov. Let's call it amateur theatrical production from the beginning until today, which is why the Canadian government is paying for CHAYA to go to Bais Yaakov Place and take very good notes. CHAYA Maxine, which she just did last week, right? So, and I also go to Bais Yaakov Place and put it on my research budget. They're not cheap, by the way, and there's a reason why they're not cheap. They're very elaborate, serious productions. Actually at the conference, my talk, which you could come to campus and hear, or you could watch it on Zoom. I think it'll probably be on YouTube. From 4 to 6:30, it's going to be about a newspaper story that I read about called "When Magda Began to Make Movies," with Bais Yaakov girls as the movie stars. It turns out not to be a fictional story. I'm 95% sure that it was a joke. But until I thought that would be so amazing if I could find an old movie from the interwar period with Sara Schenirer having written the script, which of course she would have because she was a script writer. I was saying that the Belzer Rebbe told her you're not allowed to do production because chukas are goyim. So she didn't for a couple of years, and then she got permission, I think, from the Gerer Rebbe. I'm still trying to track that down. But for whatever reason, from the 1920s until today, Bais Yaakov has had one of the things that gives it its distinctiveness as a culture is its interest in the performing arts. And this is really, in other words, Bais Yaakov is not maybe this will explain, sort of lead into the next slide. Bais Yaakov is not a female version of whatever yeshiva, my brother went to KALMAN Stolen. Bais Yaakov was not a female version of KALMAN Stolen, let's just say. It was a different beast. So what does it mean that, in other words, when you have a society that's as sexually segregated as Orthodox Judaism, maybe one of the most sexually segregated societies there is, you develop a kind of distinctive women's culture. And this distinctive women's culture, you can call it patriarchal, you could talk about women's exclusion from Talmud study, but that's only looking at it from a negative perspective. When you look at it from the positive perspective, you say, what is enabled by the absence of men, even in patriarchy, let's call it that? What becomes possible? And what becomes possible if not only are women not supposed to devote all their time from morning till night to Torah study, it's not even clear that they're allowed to do that. So then what do they do with their time? Obviously there can be a lot of learning, and there is a lot of learning, but aside from that, from the beginning, theater was a big part of it. And actually, girls from not religious families would beg their parents to go to Bais Yaakov's because they wanted to be in the play. The play was such a famous thing. It's also, the boys were jealous of the girls, which is a good thing in the society. And sometimes they would try to sneak into the girls' plays by dressing like girls to get past the guards. And then they would get into the play dressed like women. And what they would see is girls on stage with fake beards. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, so the last couple of things about Bais Yaakov is how to understand the character of Bais Yaakov. If you have to explain it in 2 slides, then I think what you would come up with is, first of all, Bais Yaakov, you have to understand that when Bais Yaakov was put under the Sara Schenirer, there was Rabbi Moshe David Flesch, whose shul Sara Schenirer went to when she had the epiphany, according to her memoir, about starting a school system for girls or whatever the epiphany was. What she heard from him was a German-speaking rabbi who looked at girls and women, which Polish rabbis did not, and who spoke to them, who directed his sermon to the women in the congregation. She had never seen anything like that before, and who praised them. In Eastern Europe, the rabbis basically did that to women and didn't look at them even when they were doing that, right? It was like, be good, and I'm turning my back to you because I don't look at girls or women. So what she got was a certain kind of German Jewish ability to have a relationship, a religious teaching relationship with girls and women. That's the first thing maybe she got out of it. And then she also got the teachings of Shachar Falhirsch, who directed his philosophical works and the idea of Torah and Derech Eretz equally to men and women, boys and girls. His school, the Hirsch school system, was co-ed, even if in separate separate parts of the building. And when Sarah Schenirer started her school system, and when the Aguda took it up, the Aguda itself was a union of Eastern European Rashi Yeshiva, Hasidic Rebbes, the Ger Rebbe most famously, and that on the German side, it was these German speaker doctor rabbis who had university degrees and were modern Orthodox, maybe you would call it. And when the Aguda took over Bais Yaakov, they kind of outsourced it to the German rabbis because the German rabbis knew what to do with girls. Germany had already had a robust women's culture, Orthodox women's culture, including even books written directed to Jewish girls who otherwise were reading Polish romance novels and falling in love with Polish heroes of the romance novels. So you have Marcus Lehmann. And the other thing, I almost forgot this, German Jews had money, at least more than the Polish ones did. So Bais Yaakov got money and professionalization and leadership and philosophy and men who would look at women, or look at women, that sounds not like what I mean, you know what I mean, right? Talk to them, lecture to them, get engaged with them, etc. They got professional advice from Germany. Bertha Pappenheim was on the board. The famous Bertha Pappenheim was also on my Freud project. She's Anna O, famous patient of Breuer. So basically what this means is that because of German influence, Bais Yaakov had a different character. Within the same family, the brother would be, a yeshiva bacher, an Eastern European yeshiva bacher, a chassid, whatever. And the daughter would be a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more philosophical, a little bit more likely to know foreign languages. You could almost say a little bit more modern, like whatever that denominational difference is between, I guess, this place and Bais Yaakov. I'm not really sure where we are on the spectrum here. But on the spectrum, where are we on the spectrum? I think this archive is like a little bit to the left of where my family was, maybe a lot. So the girls were themselves, so what's a denominational phenomenon became a gendered phenomenon in Eastern Europe. Does that make sense? Bais Yaakov had all these characteristics that it got because there were all these Germans involved in organizing it and things. So on the other hand, oops, that's not here. This is the slide I was looking for. On the other hand, these are Eastern European Jewish girls. They come from Yiddish-speaking Hasidic homes often. Not all of them, but a lot of them, right? Ger Hasidism was the main contributor to Bais Yaakov. The Ger Rebbe's daughter went to the seminary. So these are Hasidic girls. Sarah Schenirer herself had a Hasidic soul. But what does it mean to be a Hasid if you're a woman in 1912 when she's writing her diary? How do you do it? You're not welcome at the court. You're more likely to be welcome at the court if you're Bertha Pappenheim, if you're like a German Jewish woman, or even a non-Jewish woman, than if you're the daughter or wife of a Hasid. They don't want you there. I mean, the courts were, Sarah Schenirer spoke to the Belzer Rebbe, he had his back turned to her the whole time. Or maybe she didn't even speak to him. She spoke, her brother spoke on her behalf. So how are you a chassid? So basically what this meant was, and Sarah Schenirer actually, I would say, her nickname was Chassidiste. Really she was a Rebbe, but you're not allowed to say that. But she was a Rebbe. I mean, Rebbe stood up when she walked into the room. There's no doubt, without anyone saying that she was a Rebbe, there were Rebbe tales told about her. So how do you do Hasidism if you're outside the system? Basically, Bais Yaakov reinvented Hasidism for girls. They found their own pilgrimage. So this here, lots of nature walks. Sarah Schenirer herself would take people on 10-hour nature hikes, where they would start at midnight and they'd end up on top of the mountain at dawn, and they would say chakras. Actually, probably not 10 hours, more like 5 hours, right? And they'd stop in the middle and they'd light a bonfire. She basically was Hasidic in the sense of, she was neo-Hasidic, maybe you could say. She was reimagining the origins, the natural origins. So even into our period, hikes in nature, walks in nature, by Hasidic Rebbe's were not, unknown, though typically at spas. And Sarah Schenirer herself went to spas. But in many other ways, Bais Yaakov was a Hasidic movement, very infused with the passion and also very, with the social structure of a venerated leader who was Sarah Schenirer. And, during these hikes, the fire would be built and the girls would dance around Sarah Schenirer. And without the word, obviously it's not kosher to use that language about her, but without that language being used, very clear that those practices were adopted. And if you want to know more, I can tell you a lot more. There was a book of, basically you could call it Shifrei Sarah Schenirer. It's called Dimamas Tzava'ah. It came out after her death by Gershon Friedenson, the editor of the Bais Yaakov Journal and the Bais Yaakov Press and the Poale Agudas Yisrael and all that. He wrote basically what could be considered a collection of Hasidic tales about Sarah Schenirer. So anyway, here we are in the present day, and maybe I'll just say a couple more things before we turn to CHAYA. So I also collect, so basically I told you we're trying to find every Bais Yaakov that ever existed. There's the one in Toronto, I can tell you which one, right?
That's the elementary school, yeah.
There's my alma mater. I'm trying not to have any kind of anxiety here. Oh, and Renee's, who else went to that Bais Yaakov on the top right?
14th Avenue.
14th Avenue and 46th Street. Does anyone know what the middle top Bais Yaakov is, what you're looking at?
It's Krakow, no?
No. CHAYA?
No.
Antwerp.
No, I have a great one from Antwerp. Shanghai.
Wow.
And so and you could almost see the architecture. We're actually, at some point, we're going to crowdsource this and we're going to try to find every person in this photo, or as many as we can find. We already know like 5 or 6 faces, names.
In Shanghai?
What?
What year is that in Shanghai?
It's 42 or 43.
So there weren't just 70 men who went to Shanghai?
Maybe Mrs. Chanie was
Don't-
there,
So it's even more interesting and complicated than that. You all know the story about the Mary Yeshiva and the
Right,
visas.
yeah.
So the Rosh Yeshiva, Shraga Feigelman, doesn't know that he was in New York. Who is the Rosh Yeshiva? here? Who? Chaim Shmulevitz. Sorry, I got confused. Chaim Shmulevitz tells the boys, it's a visa for them, and they could take a woman with them. They could take a family with them. If they get married in the time after they get the visa, before they go, he said, I want to see every one of you finding a Bais Yaakov girl to marry. And the boys were like, I don't know where we're going. I don't know who I want to marry. The boys were not that into it. And the Bais Yaakov girls found out about this, and the Bais Yaakov girls basically hunted down these boys. And one of them, and they would go to weddings, and they would say, are you one of them? Under the guise of selling the Bais Yaakov journal. And they would say, I have a proposition to make. And there were quite a few women who saved their own lives this way. And Naftali Cohen, who's a professor at Concordia in Montreal, his grandmother, who had a fictitious visa that she got by selling the Bais Yaakov journal to some boy at a wedding. She married him fictitiously, and then she married him really. And he's we have her on tape describing this story. And Glenn Diner is writing an article, or maybe it's already published an article about this episode of the girls who tried to save themselves by finding a boy. So there's girls in that crowd who snagged themselves. Talk about a shidduch crisis, right? Anyone know what this one is?
The one in the middle?
Yeah. Under Shanghai. Oh, come on, you Canadians. Montreal, just broke in. There's the logo of the teacher seminary in Argentina, brought back by my student who's now in Argentina again. Here's my Chava Project. I don't have time, and I also couldn't figure out how to get on the internet. This is what you'll see. You'll see as many photographs as I can find. If you have family photographs, are willing to digitize them and share them. Just a good scan is fine, or even a very good high-res photo. We have photos. You click on every photo and you find out as much information as you can. There's our Bais Yaakov swag, L'Oreal Birnbaum. David Birnbaum is definitely going to get one as the closest living relative of the of the artist. I think I'm just. Oh yeah, I can't play this either. I think without the internet, can I? It doesn't matter. This is a videotape of girls. So we're now one of the projects that we want to do. We're also making a film. And what we want to document, among other things, is the pilgrimage to, because why not, right? Is the pilgrimage to Sara Scheniner's grave almost any day of the year, and often any midnight of the year. You will find Bais Yaakov girls singing and dancing around Sara Scheniner's reconstructed grave, reconstructed by Neshama Israel in 2005, I think. There's the 80th yahrzeit. The 90th yahrzeit is coming up in 2 years. This is just one of the mass gatherings around the world. This one is at the Barclay Center in Brooklyn. And the 50th one was in Madison Square Garden. So let me just say that the world does not even know that Orthodox women exist. They think that an Orthodox Jew is someone with a black hat. How they imagine these Orthodox Jews propagate, I don't know, something to do with the hat, maybe. And they also do not realize that these women have their own culture, our own culture, organizations, school systems that are not carbon copies or patriarchal, narrow, small, insular variations of the yeshivas. They're their own thing. Women have their own pilgrimage festivals. They have their own pilgrimage practices. They have their own mass gatherings in the tens of thousands to venerate a woman who died in 1935, who's remembered, who's in the heart of every Bais Yaakov girl who ever lived. And we're all sisters, right? Because we have one mother. And this is something that the world does not know. And for whatever reason, the Canadian government wants to help me get the word out. So here's, sorry, why is this not advancing? So just to give you some shots of, I spent the summer filming with Pearl Block, Bais Yaakov of Borough Park, everybody involved in this project, not everybody, but almost everybody went to Bais Yaakov. So Pearl Block is a filmmaker, professor at Penn State. There she is with my mother, who turned 100 that summer. She just got over COVID for the second time. She should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. And there we are interviewing my mother about Bais Yaakov Chernovitz. And there is the seminary building, and there we interviewed Joanna Lizak, who was supposed to be at the conference, but she got COVID, it's still out there. And, oh my God, what's his name? Dario Steckert. This is Dario Steckert, who's the one who discovered these are two Polish Catholics who are, devote their lives to Jewish history. Dariusz is the one who, he's the one who, quote unquote, discovered Sara Scheniner's Lost Diary, which is about to be published. Joanna is going to present on it, but now it's going to be on Zoom. And there's the seminary building, and there is Frank London. Does anyone know who Frank London is? Frank London of the Klezmatics, probably the world's best klezmer musician, clarinetist, playing his clarinet, playing the Bais Yaakov lead on his clarinet in the seminary building stairwell. We have that on film. And here's me in Israel with the Machne Yehuda graffiti at Sarah Schenirer. Do you know about that? So Machne, Machne Yehuda, the show. So in Machne Yehuda, there's a graffiti artist who did all these Jewish faces on the gates when they closed the stores. And Sara Scheniner's face we were gonna film there or do something, and we got there and her face was defaced. Somebody had covered it over with black spray paint. I have no idea why, like maybe it's a woman, who knows. So we actually found the graffiti artist, and you're not allowed to pay someone to be in your documentary film, so we just paid for his spray paint and got him to do it again, and we have that on tape. And I guess, what else? Oh yes, Robka. Here's Robka, the famous resort town where Sara Schenirer, where the girls spent, until they had the seminary building, they spent 3 months there every summer getting trained, and then they would immediately be sent off to their first position. And do not pass go, which means do not go home, because your parents will try to get you involved in shidduchim, and they didn't want that because they were desperate for teachers. Here's another photo from Robka, and in the Birnbaum archive, there's I think 4 or 5 other photos of Robka, the Birnbaums, Shlomo Birnbaum and his wife Irina visiting Robka. We didn't have an address, we just had a bunch of photos. We got in a car, drove to Robka. We're walking around town holding the photo, and we're standing in front of that house, and the guy comes out of his front door and he says, "Can I help you?" And we said, "Is this your house?" And he said, "Yes, obviously it's my house." And he said, why are you filming? And we said, well, we're doing a documentary about this girls' school system. He said, oh yeah, my grandfather told me about the girls that would come every summer. And we said, can we go inside? And he said, yes, but it's we haven't remodeled in 80 years. We're like, perfect. So this is me from actually the view from the porch. What that looks like. That's Robka. And here, the Birnbaums and Bais Yaakov, I'm not going to get into that because KALMAN's going to tell you a lot more about the Birnbaum archive. So maybe that's enough for now, except I think I'll turn this. Oh yeah, on the website, lots of walking tours, so if you're in Williamsburg and you want to know where all the Bais Yaakovs are, where was the first? Bais Yaakov in Williamsburg. We have a walking tour of Williamsburg. If you're in Krakow, you know where the seminary building is, you know where Sara Scheniner's grave is. What else is there of Bais Yaakov interest? We'll tell you 10 other things of Bais Yaakov interest. And we're going to have one in Toronto. So that's, I think, my segue. Sorry, I know I went on way too long.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. Will be brief, especially because I'm suffering a little bit from the curse of the second speaker, which is that Professor SEIDMAN has massively hit most of the things I was going to say, which is why I'm a student. It's great. And I'm going to try and just break what. No. I am, yes.
That's good.
What is that?
I'm going to tell you in a moment. I want to take what Jam said and sort of take it to Toronto specifically and into the present day. I'm a student of Bais Yaakov, a graduate of Bais Yaakov Toronto, which I'm going to just tell you the brief history of. Like Professor Bennett said, I feel a little bit, I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room who know a lot more about Toronto Jewish history than I do, but very briefly, in the early 1900s, Jewish community in Toronto was concentrated in the Ward neighborhood, which is incidentally just south of where I go to school with NAOMI at UT now. This is the Elm Street Synagogue, which where its time started called at the time the WEISER Talmud Torah. It was an afternoon school at the time. It opened in 1915 and it grew very, very quickly. And in 1926, they opened a parallel girls' school class. Again, still only in the afternoon. And I'm going to be brief. It grew very quickly again, and then of course after the Holocaust, there was a big influx of religious people who wanted to have a school for their children. It was steadily growing, and eventually there was a school for an afternoon school opened for high school boys. And eventually, Bais Yaakov of Toronto was opened as an extension of its time. It was in a school. Sorry, there was a school at that point on Viewmount, as I'm sure many of you, and it opened in the house next door. There was a grade 9 on and off for a while, and then there started being a grade 10 class that was the beginning of Bais Yaakov in Toronto. It eventually, I forgot, I had a photo for this. This is when they moved in. I just found this photo and I liked it. This is when they moved to Viewmount. I don't know if you can read it, but in 1956, Bais Yaakov schools established at Viewmount. That's still the elementary school. But I'm sorry. 1960 or 1963, there's some differing dates for when Bais Yaakov High School of Toronto opened. And that was, so sorry, I apologize. What is interesting about, what is, I think, useful about Toronto as an example is that it follows a lot of established patterns that we see with other out-of-town Bais Yaakov, which is that you start with this community school that's sort of grassroots and open to everyone. And then as the community grows, you could sort of say that the community school is a victim of its own success, in that the community is bigger and parents are able to be like pickier. And so Toronto follows this pattern of having the initial school growing and growing and growing, and then opening up other schools competing because the community is now able to uphold multiple schools. NAOMI and I, well, not really I, but on the Tiago Project, we have Dr. Leslie Ginsburg-Klein, who does a lot of research on sort of like contemporary trends in Bais Yaakov, and she's written about this. She's going to be at the conference as well. And she's written about how this is a very common pattern in out-of-town communities, that you start with this community school, and then they grow and you open these parallel schools. So this is Tiferes Bais Yaakov and Minos Bais Yaakov. And Minos Bais Yaakov opened in 1999 to be like a more like conservative or right-wing option, and then Tiferes in 2000 to be a more left-wing option. And there are sort of like, communal shades of difference between those. And that's, again, like a very typical pattern for how Bais Yaakov's communities evolve and develop. So that's, I think, one of the things that we're doing, and I'm doing with NAOMI, is we're, again, studying these trends, studying these contemporary, what happens, we have that whole story, and then, where does that go after that? So this, okay, this is me. Okay, there's a lot to say. First, fun little plug. That's me on Bais Yaakov play. This was when I was in seminary, not in high school. That's me there, and in the role of the ringleader of the Haskalah, bringing the threat of secular education to the Jewish community. So make of that what you will. That's just a fun fact. But I want to talk about the Bais Yaakov play, which again, like Professor Simon said, starts in the very early years of Bais Yaakov. And to me, the Bais Yaakov play is a really good example of what I think is the sort of three components of what Bais Yaakov is right now. So obviously it's a school system, and it's about education. And the way that that manifests in the plays is that you might be able to surmise. So this is many Bais Yaakov plays have historical themes. In fact, I think that marrying someone so that you can get to Shanghai has been the subject of tens of Bais Yaakov plays, I'm sure. Often historical, always some sort of like educational message, and theme and sort of religious lesson to it, I would say. And so that's one important component of the Bais Yaakov play. But more, and also obviously of Bais Yaakov, which of course is a school, and like the high school I went to would very much prided itself on specifically its halacha education as being like exceptional among Bais Yaakovs, and yeah, so definitely education is a huge part of a school, you would think. But I think that when you think of the Bais Yaakov as simply a school system, you're really missing out on a huge part of the story, which is what I titled this talk, which is education, community, and culture. So the Bais Yaakov play is, I would say, first and foremost, supposed to be an educational experience for the students in the school. And they are, they're learning about, hopefully, about the subject matter that the play is about. And they're also, and this is important and part of the culture part, is that Bais Yaakov plays are one of many instances of, like Naomi said, performance culture and, yeah, I mean, performance culture, etc. I would say that Bais Yaakovs have, like, you'll have a choir on Bais Yaakov, on Rosh Chodesh. You'll have, at least in my school, I'm drawing mainly from my own experience, but I think this is pretty universal, that their grade 12 will have all these different committees, and each one will have a theme song, and everyone in the school learns the theme song, and that's part of the cultural experience. And that this is something that this is not original to me at all. Other people have spoken about this, the fact that Bais Yaakov girls have a lot of opportunities to develop leadership skills and creativity and things like that, that, as you mentioned, like from community, people will say, like, it's such a shame that boys don't get these opportunities, and that girls have, and that, not a shame, but that girls do have these opportunities to lead, to take initiative, to run huge things. I'm not even going to get to the convention, which is like a gigantic undertaking. So the Bais Yaakov play produces this internal culture of these songs that get passed on, and this education, this cultural experience, which also goes back to Sara Schenirer, who had, in the earliest days of Bais Yaakov, there would be, singing on Shabbos afternoons and things like that. This is something that's been present as more than just education from the very beginning of Bais Yaakov, and it's still present. And lastly, and this is like an interesting tension, that the Bais Yaakov play is, again, I would say, this is like a bit of a tension, but primarily about the experience of producing it. But at the end of the day, you produce something for the community. And Bais Yaakov, again, it's education and it's culture for teenage girls. I'm ignoring elementary school at the moment. But it's also very much a player within its community. And that appears in a bunch of different ways. And one of them is that people who often will not be going to, generally produce theater get an opportunity to an evening out, women only, of course, to see some amateur theater and have a good time. But that's just one instance of the much broader way that, again, Bais Yaakov is a player within its community. So right now it's like almost Pesach time. When I was in high school, it was a volunteer thing, but if you were willing and able, you could sign up to be sent to different people in the community who might need some help Pesach cleaning. And Sunday morning, you'd spend a couple hours helping someone out. And even when it wasn't Pesach time, there were constant like chesed opportunities and initiatives that were expected of the students, that we were expected to be players within our community. Our school used to talk about how before there was a government requirement for community service hours, Bais Yaakov was doing that. And you had to have 40 hours throughout high school. I think like most of us had about 60 hours each year. And because Bais Yaakov very much sees itself as not just a closed off, specific educational thing for its own students, but very, very much a player within its community. So again, there's all these different things. Rabbi Stefanski II and most formative principle of Bais Yaakov in Toronto, had a pet project which was called Schenirer, which was to teach Hebrew to the new wave of Soviet or post-Soviet Jewish immigrants, and also just general like Jewish education, which I taught a girl Hebrew when I was in grade 9, which again is part of this whole picture of Bais Yaakov as part of its own community and as a really important resource for its own community and an important player in forming its communal life and communal culture. So to me, the Bais Yaakov play is a really good example of the way that, yeah, we've got education, you have, and you can't really see, but like we have been to the backdrops, like it's a big project, like maybe mentioned, education of its own students, cultural production of its own students, and being a player and a contributor toward the broader community that it's a part of. And yeah, so to me, the Bais Yaakov play is a really good example of that, and that's what I've been researching with NAOMI and interviewing people working on Bais Yaakov plays. That's our big new project, as Professor Simon mentioned. And so, thank you for your time.
We already did the introduction, so.
Yeah, let me get you guys. This is a good opportunity to use the washroom for those of you who use David.
Oh, I remember,
Yaacov, your daughter's one.
Thank you.
Yaacov. Thank you
Very much.
We don't speak about negative aspects of this. I try to.
You can talk to Naomi about that. She knows about the first. Sorry, what?
No one's saying.
Not in this setting, but maybe in other settings. Yeah, maybe tomorrow if you come to the conference, more of that kind of stuff will happen. Yeah. Yeah. What?
did you hear what you said?
Now I know 7. I don't want
Right. Yeah. Everything is.
Let's start with
She was about 18. She was about 18. It was a very big
We're going to get started.
Okay, we're, time is marching along, so I'm going to get started. Almost.
Hesped that he made, and he talked about it. I'm going to send it to you.
Okay, we'll just wait for David to take a seat. So it's a pleasure to be here this morning. It's not very often that I get to talk about, or rather to be in the presence of people I'm talking about, with a close family. Usually I talk about people who, lived in the 19th century. So this is a real pleasure. It's also quite intimidating because I'm standing right in front of my heroes. So, all right, let me start my clock because, like Naomi said, professors of Jewish history tend to talk. And I gotta be mindful of the time. Naomi's always wonderful to speak after her because Naomi brings to you an authentic New York accent. I also have a New York accent, you can compare notes, but we're from, actually, Naomi and I are from the same place, but we have two very different trajectories. I was born in Borough Park, Brooklyn, but I grew up in Staten Island, worlds apart. Okay. When I came to Toronto about 20 years ago, just to start with a little personal story, it was very difficult, my adjustment, for many idiosyncratic reasons. But one of the high points of this was the presence of the Birnbaum family collection, the archives here in Toronto, which is, I'm going to make clear for you a case, one of the most important archives for understanding the modern Jewish experience. I was always working in YIVO, the Jewish Scientific Institute in New York, which is mainly about secular topics, although there's largely Orthodox or rabbinic collections there also. But YIVO was founded in Vilna in 1925 to pursue a mission of Jewish national mission of collecting data about Jews to build a modern, secular, Yiddish-speaking culture. Now, one of the reasons why the Birnbaum archive is so important is precisely because it tells you parts of the other side of the story. It's very comprehensive, but it tells us so much about the much neglected world of Orthodoxy. And in part, it's not only about the history of Orthodoxy, but it's also figures who were significant in secular movements like Yiddishism, like the birth of Zionism, but have been largely disregarded or for a long time neglected by modern Jewish historiography, precisely because they were Orthodox. And Orthodoxy for a long time got short shrift in mainstream Jewish historiography. Thankfully, that's begun to change in recent decades. So this is an amazing story I'm going to tell you about 3 generations of this spectacular family. I'm not going to hide my admiration, okay? There's no point. So let me tell you, first of all, who these people are, our main players. Standing is Solomon Birnbaum, the first professor of Yiddish in a modern European university. The man who dated the Dead Sea Scrolls before radiocarbon dating was applied. Also, the major figure in Yiddish scholarship, aside from Max Weinreich, who was the head of YIVO. When I was in graduate school, I first encountered Solomon Birnbaum. His ideas were a radical challenge to the mainstream of secular Yiddish scholarship. I won't go too deep into that now, but this is a major figure who settles here in Toronto. His papers are sitting in a basement of a home in North York, Toronto. Scholars from throughout the world come to visit. David's here, who's curated this collection for the last 30 years. Right in the basement of his house. He's done a mammoth job of annotating, indicating, providing information to scholars visiting. My first encounter with David was, well, just to give you more history, I discovered the Birnbaums when I was first read a biography of Nathan Birnbaum, who's sitting on the right. Learned about his fantastic transformations of Judaism. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Then I discovered his son Solomon, who was a Yiddish scholar, a scholar of Jewish languages. I wrote an article. I sent it to David. David not only corrected the facts that were wrong, that only he would know, he also corrected my English grammar. I think his brother Eli Luza Birnbaum also had a hand in this. This is not the kind of treatment that a scholar usually gets when we do this in archive. I merely sent a letter to Toronto, and I got this tremendous feedback. Sitting, of course, is Jacob Birnbaum, the founder of the movement to liberate Soviet Jewry in the 1960s, this grassroots movement that I'll tell you about in a minute. The exodus of about 1.5 million Jews from the Soviet Union really traces its origins to the activity of this young man, or then young man. And there are other people in the story that you'll soon encounter. So let me begin with Nathan. Nathan was born in the second half of the 20th century in Vienna to parents from Galicia, traditional Jews. But Nathan made his way away from Orthodox Judaism as a young man. This was the current of the time. Young Jews were attracted to materialism, secular philosophy, things of this nature. But he went a different way. Even though he was no longer Orthodox by the time he had reached university, probably after his father's death when he was a boy, he probably began to move in a different direction. He maintained an extremely strong Jewish consciousness. At a time when most Jews in Vienna considered themselves part of the German nation, Jews by religion, part of the German nation, he found this idea ridiculous. He insisted that Jews were a distinct people. He founded a student youth group called Kadima, which was the first major Jewish youth group in a university of Vienna. He's really the leader of Zionism before Theodor Herzl. He creates this journal called Selbstemanzipation. You see it on the left, in the early 1880s. This is where the term Zionism is coined, right? It's one of these ironies of history that historiography of the Zionist movement has forgotten the man who created the term Zionism itself. That's begun to change, but for a very long time, he was written out of this history. What did he want at the time? He wanted settlement, agricultural settlement of Jews in the land of Israel. He wanted the revival of the Hebrew language. He wanted Jews to be proud Jews and not to consider themselves some part of another group, because frankly, he thought it was ridiculous. No one else thought Jews were Germans except for Jews. He later grew sour on the idea of Zionism, however. He thought it was spiritually barren. Theodor Herzl came on the scene. He created political Zionism. It lacked a cultural dimension. Through his political activity, particularly in Galicia, the province of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where his parents had come from, he encountered Eastern European Jews. And it took some time, but from being someone who looked down upon Yiddish as this mongrel deformation of German, Jews should learn Hebrew, they should get away from Yiddish, he became a champion of Yiddish and Eastern European Jewry. So much so that over time, he became a champion of the cause we call diaspora nationalism. And this is really the second phase that we associate with him, the movement for recognition of Jews as a national community in multi-ethnic empires of Eastern Europe. In his case, this was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 1908, he organizes the famous First Yiddish Language Conference, which is held in Czernowitz, which is a city you've heard a lot about today, very famous city in Jewish history. This is the picture you see in the bottom right. Here he is with his wife sitting to his right, with various other figures who were at the conference, not all of them. You can see Yudlam Pevitz on the right, Chaim Shiklovsky. I can go on and on. Of course, all of these are secular figures. By this time, however, Nathan Birnbaum had begun his path of returning quotation marks. He'd grown up Orthodox. He had begun to return to traditional practice. And this is something that unfolded over the next decade. It didn't all happen at once, and it's a complicated process. He's written books about it, I highly recommend. I mean, this is what Nathan Birnbaum is mainly remembered today. He's the famous Baal Tshuva, whose books like From an Apikolis to a Believer are still read, right? This is an amazing story in itself. There are various versions of the story. One version is that he went to New York in 1907 as he's crossing the Atlantic. He had an experience with Shekhinah. He encounters the divine presence over the waters of the Atlantic. And there are other versions too, but it's a gradual process that leads to his return to full observance. His sons follow with him. The family becomes from. This is Nathan Birnbaum, not long after. By around the early 1920s, he is the general secretary of Agudas Yisrael, which was founded formally in 1912, becomes more prominent after World War I. NAOMI's spoken a bit about this, so I won't go into great detail, but imagine this man who was only a decade earlier at the head of the secular Yiddishist diaspora nationalist movement is now one of the heads of the movement of organized Orthodox Jewry in Eastern Europe. Right? This is an amazing story in itself. Later on in his life, he also grew somewhat distanced from this. He found that there were problems with Orthodoxy too. He continued to be an Orthodox Jew, but he found that the leadership of the Aguda, he felt he was spending too much time not focused enough on the everyday needs of Jews, both spiritual and material. Throughout the end of his years of his life, He launched a movement called the Olim, or Aulim, as they say in the German pronunciation of Hebrew, for an elite of Jews to settle and create agricultural communities in the land of Israel. And this is really, in some ways, a return to his early thought of the late 19th century, but now with a spiritual side to it. Now I'm going to take you to the next generation. Oh, this is just a photo of his trip. Thank you, Naomi gave me this photo from David's archives of Nathan Birnbaum on his trip to the United States in 1921. He made several trips to the United States, a few trips to the United States in his lifetime. And by the way, this was, I should say, emphasize, this was shocking to his peers in the Zionist movement and other movements. He continued to be an influential thinker. People continued to read him. He was a very important critic of other movements. But people didn't know, at a time when everybody, large numbers of Jews were moving away from tradition, it was shocking to see someone move back to tradition. In a sense, he's one of the pioneering Balei Tshuva of the 20th century. Okay, here we get to Shlomo Birnbaum, Solomon Birnbaum. By the way, you might find it remarkable in itself, and I've written a book that's largely a biography of Solomon Birnbaum, and I have a chapter which starts with his name. What's special about his name? Because his name was Zalomo Birnbaum, Zalomo Asher Birnbaum, right? This is how he's registered in the Kehillah of Vienna in the early 20th century. Who names his children Zalomo in the early 20th century, the late 19th century, I should say? The leadership of the Kehillah in Vienna greatly encouraged his parents to choose a different name, like Zygmunt, right? All the sons had traditional names. It wasn't quite illegal, but the Kehillah of Vienna very much encouraged the parents to choose non-traditional names. In fact, I found an article saying all these Jewish boys come from Galicia to Vienna. It was a trend in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. To make a living, you leave from the provinces, you come to Vienna, things are better there. But they can't get by because they're burdened by these Yiddish and Hebrew names. They all need to change their names when they come. And here he was going against the current of the time. Okay, so on the left is you have Solomon Birnbaum's 1918 Yiddish grammar. This is the first major modern scientific grammar of Yiddish. He actually wrote it when he was 23. He started writing it, he really wrote it when he was in 1915, but World War I came in the way. He volunteered to serve. He was actually editing the proofs in the trenches. He was shot in the neck on the front in Italy, spent a lot of time in the hospital recovering, where he started to work on what eventually became his doctoral dissertation, even before he started graduate school. In fact, it's important to note that he wrote this book without access to a library, without formal linguistics training. He'd only had a little bit of tutoring in the subject. So this is an amazing autodidact. In fact, many of these people in this story I'm going to tell you are autodidacts. It's a brilliant family. There's just no two ways other than to describe it. This book opens the doors to his getting a position to teach Yiddish at the University of Hamburg in 1922. It opens the doors to generations of scholars of German, or German scholars, to say scholars who read German, to encounter Yiddish. Begin to take it seriously. In fact, the reason why we call the word Yiddish in scientific literature by the 1920s and 30s is because Solomon Birnbaum called it Yiddish, and not jargon or Judendeutsch or some other word. I'm not talking about how Jews called it. That's a different story. He said this is the language of Jews. It deserves respect as such. It's like any other language. Therefore, we're going to call it Yiddish, which is what it's called by its speakers. And from Yiddish in German, we get Yiddish, of course, in English academic usage. Here he is with his family in Hamburg in 1932. His wife Irene Leckel. It's hard to imagine. This is Lucia Birnbaum as a his sister, his older sister, and this is Yaacov on the right, and that's, of course, Solomon Birnbaum. This is Bais Yaakov. I'm not going to say much about Bais Yaakov because you've heard a lot, but I will say that Birnbaum was the language expert for Bais Yaakov. He introduced the Orthodox system of spelling, which was based on pre-Haskalah writing in Yiddish with scientific tweaks, which is, in my opinion, the best spelling system in Yiddish that exists to this day, but has fallen out of use except for a few people. All right, if you have any questions about that, I'll tell you about that privately, because most people think spelling isn't interesting. I think spelling is fascinating. Okay, unfortunately, he had to leave Germany in 1933. I mean, he was lucky, I shouldn't say unfortunately, he was prescient. I found a letter from him. He was involved in this project, and it's a whole other story, to create a chair for Yiddish in Weimar, Germany. The people who were working with him to create the chair ended up becoming Nazis. That's a whole other story, but he understood by 1933, he wrote to his father that I expect in a decade there will be almost no Jews left in Germany. He didn't understand what was going to happen, but he knew it was only going to get much, much worse. He himself was roughed up in the postal office in Hamburg. His son Yaacov was very little, was roughed up by other boys. They shoved dirt into his mouth. In secret, he met with his brother and father, and I'll tell you the brothers in a minute. They left Germany. They made plans to leave Germany, and they all met in Holland, where most of the family lived after 33. He made his way to London. His wife was born in Vienna, but had grown up in London, so it facilitated the process of going to London. He became, and this is itself a remarkable story. I mean, David has told me this story, it's been written about, it's still hard to believe. This important professor, linguist, Jobson, knocked on the door of his house in London. Imagine this is a family of refugees, they've got nothing. Knocks on the door, holding up a little grammar book, and says, "Are you Professor Birnbaum, who wrote this book?" Began a lifetime friendship. Jobson, along with the Jewish community of London, helped to create positions for him eventually, 2 positions lectureships. One in Hebrew paleography and epigraphy, that is a study of old Hebrew writing through the generations. And the other is Yiddish. So he became, at University of College in London, the expert in Yiddish and Hebrew writing in Yiddish. Let me just say a word about the paleography, because it may not be obvious to people. Paleography means old writing. He developed the system of dating texts based on the shape of Hebrew letters. How did this happen? When he was a young man in the 1920s, he was studying Yiddish Bible translations. And he noticed that all these books, these manuscripts, I could say, that the great founders of Wissenschaft des Judentums, that is the scholarship of Judaism, which began in 19th century Germany, they were getting the dates wrong. All the collections in European libraries had lots of errors. So he wanted to get a job correcting the errors. No one was going to hire him for this kind of thing. But he developed a system of dating text based on handwriting. He wrote a doctoral dissertation, or I should call it a habilitation. In Germany and much of Europe, you have to write a second dissertation to become a full professor. And he was a lowly lecturer. So his habilitation dissertation, he wrote 2 of them, in fact, one on Hebrew poetry, one on Hebrew scripts, showing how you could date these things. They were both rejected. The reasons were probably because, first of all, his scholarship was too avant-garde. It was too pioneering for his times. And his colleagues, he thought his colleagues were jealous. It's quite possible that there were anti-Semitic motives also. Particularly in the second case, the paleography document, dissertation, at least one of the scholars was a member of the Nazi Party, right? So he understood very well what he was dealing with in those times. This is the reprint that David, Elazar Birnbaum, Elie Birnbaum, and Jean Baumgarten in Paris, that we reissued in 2016 of Solomon Birnbaum's, one of his great works, which is Yiddish: A Survey to Grammar, which is really everything he's done about Yiddish in one book. When I say everything, is a gross exaggeration. Some of his major hits about Yiddish that changed the field of study of Yiddish over his lifetime. Fortunately, he had a very long life. He lived to be almost 100. This is an excerpt from, well, these, of course, this is, I think this is public. These are documents, these are materials he used in producing his book, his other major work, which is the Hebrew scripts, the study of Hebrew writing for thousands of years, right? And what you can see is his own writing, his own reproductions of various writings that are used in these books. By the way, he studied architecture for a few years. Everyone in his family has this amazing artistic sense. You can see how well they draw. Here he is, or rather, here he is with his brother Menachem. So let me tell you a little bit about Menachem. This photo was taken in Hamburg in the early 1920s. Max Weiner, the famous scholar of Yiddish, one of the founders of YIVO, led YIVO in New York until his death in 1969. Max Weinreich was so impressed with Solomon Birnbaum, he invited him to join Evo, but Solomon Birnbaum refused. He didn't want to be part of a Jewish organization that was founded on secularist principles. He was willing to work with Evo scholars, to print in their journals, but he didn't want to be a member of the philological section of Evo. Max Weinreich lived with Menachem Birnbaum, his brother, in Berlin when Max Weinreich was a student. Naturally, he expected that Solomon Birnbaum would be eager to join him in his activities. Here he is, traveling with Menachem to Hamburg. He took his wife, that's Regina Weinreich on the right. That is Tina Birnbaum, Menachem's wife, on the left. They all sat together in this famous restaurant in Hamburg, Jacob's restaurant. Who's taking the photo? Max Weinreich. Max Weinreich esteemed the Birnbaums so much that he stood outside the photo and took the photo of them. Right? That's how much Yiddish scholarship admired him, even though that's largely been forgotten. This is, Menachem Birnbaum is the second son. Menachem was an illustrator and artist of great talent. I chose this photo because it shows his light side. This is one of his, postcards, showing, the Jew burning the midnight oil. By day, he's writing exchange bills. By night, he's playing cards, right? These humorous postcards that he made. This is some of his more, you might say, serious art. This is his portrait of the Rambam. This is from his book, Hagadio. This is the Angel of Death, Slaughters and Cattle Slaughter. We recently did this exhibit at the University of Toronto. We're hoping the University of Toronto will become a permanent home of the Birnbaum collection. This is one of these amazing books. You have to take a look at his artwork. This is stuff that art collectors in Europe, art galleries in Europe, art archives have many copies. Some of it's here in Toronto, but there's a lot of the stuff in Europe, and of course some of it's been published. Fantastic artist. Unfortunately, Menachem was also murdered by the Germans. He and his family, his wife, his 2 children, probably killed in Auschwitz. That's the last they were seen. Uriel fortunately survived. This is the youngest son. Uriel was not only an artist, but also a poet, a writer. Here he is, his book, In God's War. Uriel wrote a lot about war. He was also a frontline soldier who was injured during World War I. He was a Habsburg champion. He believed the Habsburg Empire was a good thing. Of course, the Habsburg Empire fell apart after World War I. Because the Habsburg Empire was beloved by Jews, because Jews were treated as equals. Jews were one national group amongst many. He felt this was precisely the kind of thing we need to prevent people from becoming savages who kill each other in the name of nationalism. This is one of his children's books, but he's mainly known for his other artwork on Jewish themes. By the way, I'm neglected to mention that Menachem was the in-house art director of 2 important Jewish publishing houses in Berlin, the Weltverlag and Ostverlag, all right? So very important Jewish publishing houses. Menachem is celebrated to this day. Menachem, but also Uriel. I'm sorry, I'm getting the names confused with so many Birnbaums, but you know who I'm talking about. These are some other works by Uriel. You see he worked a lot on Jewish themes. Both of them worked on non-Jewish themes too, because they earned their livings by doing artwork. So there's also commercial stuff they did, like calendars, but tremendously creative people. And I believe, and David could tell me where it is precisely, there are actually stained glass windows with this artwork here in Toronto. Now this is Yaacov, Jacob. Jacob is perhaps best known to people in this room. Jacob was very much influenced by the experience of his family, the experience of World War II. As a young man, or as a young boy, I should say, in London, Jacob remembered his father coming home at night crying. Why was his father crying during World War II beyond the obvious reasons? His father was employed with the British Censorship Office, which meant it was his job to read all the letters that were coming across the British Empire, from Jews and non-Jews. He was assigned the Jewish letters, which meant he read the letters in Yiddish, he read the letters in Ladino, he read the letters in Judeo-Arabic if he could, he read the letters in other Jewish languages. he became very familiar with all sorts of Jewish languages, and this is how he became the founder of the field of modern Jewish interlinguistics, the study of Jewish languages and their relationship to each other, right? By working on these letters during World War II. He knew Solomon, what was going on in occupied territory. He wasn't allowed to talk about it, it was confidential. In fact, the British used some of this information for military purposes. They used it to bomb German installations. People would write, there's a this going on, there's a that going on, and from that, the British were able to deduce where there was a German factory producing munitions. But Jacob knew from his father what was going on with the lives of Jews. He was inspired to act on their behalf. After World War II, he worked with Holocaust survivors for their relief. He also worked with Jewish boys, disadvantaged boys in Morocco. He founds in the 1960s, he comes to the United States. He founds the movement on behalf of Soviet Jewry, the Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, which is a nonviolent movement which was inspired by the civil rights movement at the time. And you're probably familiar with this to some extent, but you know, he's living in New York. He's going up to Yeshiva University, knocking on the doors of students, telling them to come out to mass rallies. The slogan of the movement becomes, "Let my people go." And here you can see him. This is simply one of the mass rallies. This is the Russian, "Let my people go." This went on for some time, of course. Finally, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Soviet Jewry was finally allowed to leave. Birnbaum's role in this movement is beginning to be written. It's appeared in a few articles, but we're still waiting a comprehensive history of this movement and the pioneering role of Jacob Birnbaum. By the way, there's a street named on Washington Heights for him, right? This is where he lived much of his life until 2014. Finally, I simply want to bring home the point that this is a Toronto family. David, who's here, moved with his parents because his brother, Ellie, was here. His other brother was by then in New York. One family member, Chava, yes, I'll say that in a second. One family member, Chava, is still living in England. The family settled here. Ellie became a professor of Turkology, the study of Turkish languages at the University of Toronto, which now has its papers. People tell me over and over again when I mention that I write about Solomon Birnbaum, I used to run into him in the Stax Robarts Library. He was hard of hearing, but we had conversations. This is what they always tell me. I think of Solomon Birnbaum as a tall man because everyone describes him in memoirs as a tall man. And then you see, and everyone you meet here in Toronto says, I remember him as a small, older gentleman. Okay, this happens as we age. Here's the family. This is Sarah, who's with us today. This is her wedding. What year is this? 1983. Okay, I don't read my own notes. I get very excited. This is a family that struck deep roots here in Toronto, multiple generations. This family spread out elsewhere. But this is a family that's made major contributions to Jewish history and to Toronto Jewish history. Several of Solomon Birnbaum's books, or his major book, I should say, was published twice by the University of Toronto Press. Once by him, once by me. So I don't know that's like vicarious ethos, something like that. That's as much as I'm going to say. I think you get my point. I think this is an amazing gem that more people need to know about, and that it would be a shame if this collection left Toronto. Thank you.
Questions if anybody has.
Chaya,
Naomi.
I can't believe I didn't take a picture of you when you were up there, so this is my opportunity.
Okay.
Maybe you probably take a picture of all three of us?
Yes, David.
So to Dr. Weiser, what would it mean?
Oh, yeah. You do a favor just for our recording. You speak at the microphone. It's over there, but it's thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
So first to Dr. Simon and Chaya, I'm the chairman of the Ontario Jewish Archives. So I don't know whether some of your findings come from the archives, but if you find things that are not on the archives and the results of your research, we would love to have it in the Ontario Jewish Archives to be available in perpetuity to researchers. that's a common.
Yeah, before CHAYA started this work, there was someone named Hannah Schachter who was working on it, who I think went to your archive on my behalf. Does that name sound ring a bell?
That's it.
Okay, we have to talk.
Yeah, so there's new things we'd love to
Oh,
happen.
okay.
And secondly, to Dr. WEISER, what would it mean to the University of Toronto to have these archives here in the university? I know it's in Toronto, I had the privilege of seeing it myself. And what is required to make that happen?
So, I mean, this is a question for three people, really. Partly for me, partly for NAOMI, and partly for David. And some of it will be, I think, we'll have a private conversation afterwards. As a scholar who specializes in the culture and language of Eastern European Jewry, cultures and languages of Eastern European Jewry, I should say that one of the rare chairs in Yiddish studies is here at the University of Toronto. There are graduate students who can work with this collection for decades. Scholars who will come. University of Toronto is located on the subway line. David is, I don't want to speak in David's name, but a non-climate controlled basement in North York is not the future of this collection, right? It needs proper curation and digitalization, hopefully one day. The University of Toronto has a Hebrew language curator, a Judaic studies curator, has staff. It's got graduate students who are eager to work with this. It's an international site that researchers come to. It makes tremendous sense for the University of Toronto to become the home of this collection. What that will take is complicated, and that's what I could talk to you more about that in private with David present. And maybe NAOMI would like to say, I'm at York, so let's make that clear. I love this collection, I love this family, I love Toronto, but I'm sort of the short, I don't know what the right idiom is, but I'm the outsider to all of this. I don't have a pony in this race, is that the phrase? Something like this. I'm just supporting, I'm a booster. So NAOMI can speak directly as someone who teaches Yiddish literature, Jewish studies, modern Jewish literature at the University of Toronto, and works directly with these students more about that.
Just really quickly, so first of all, what this archive has, I go to archives and look for material about Bais Yaakov, in case you haven't figured that out. I've gone to Yibo, for instance, and looked through the microfiche of the Bais Yaakov journal. I spent the summer doing that. I've gone to Israel and looked at the National Library archive of that. Those archives don't have what the Birnbaum archive has in the flesh, right? They're missing issues. That there are all kinds of things that this archive has that the best archives in the world don't have, and partly it's a problem of Orthodox history. The National Library of Israel has been archiving, digitizing, newspapers all around the world. The Orthodox newspapers come last. Why the Orthodox newspapers come last, I don't know. And then when you look at the Orthodox world itself and you see what the Aguda archive in Lower Manhattan looked like, I mean, it was not professional. There are people who devote their lives to it, so I don't want to, but they're not David Birnbaum. And there are people who get paid and they're not David Birnbaum. He's doing it out of his love. So this is an archive that we don't have. The Orthodox world does not have an archive like this. Unfortunately, they're not, the money, for whatever reasons. If the archive came to the University of Toronto, you could train a generation. First of all, you aside from people using the archive, what does it mean to have a raw archive, to learn how to display it, how to educate people about it, how to have international conferences about it, to link it up with other archives, to have, for the first time really, a world-class Orthodox archive. I'm very devoted to Orthodox Jewish history, and it's about time. We've been working, when we wrote the article in the foreword, KALMAN and I just had an article in the foreword. Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi says, history is the faith of fallen Jews. And I say, okay, the Jews who aren't fallen, they need some history too. Orthodox Jews, and to me, the fact that the Orthodox Jewish community in Toronto doesn't really even quite understand the treasure that it has in its midst. So this is, obviously it knows the spiritual treasures that it has. By the way, this is, Nathan Birnbaum was always telling Orthodox Jews, you don't know what you have. So it's funny that I just said that same sentence. You don't know what you have. You need an outsider to come in and tell you. a Baal Tshuva to come in and tell you what Orthodoxy could be. So, so Orthodox Jewish history is a sadly neglected field. Orthodox Jews have other priorities, understandably. There's a lot of yeshivas, there's a lot of kids, understandably. But this really has to be, so basically the vision is to make the University of Toronto the leading place for the study of Orthodoxy. And I think what that would mean is persuading Orthodox students that it's okay to come, it's not terrible, you're not going to be coming out to course if you come to the University of Toronto, and that you can study something other than dentistry. But that's a whole other story. Sorry to the dentists out there. Hi, you want to add something?
Yeah, just the recording, yeah. More about the shop.
Anyway, thank you. This is a question on precisely about two things. I mean, one is I have a familial connection with Bais Yaakov. First question is, how many students pre-war were in Bais Yaakov in Europe? And the second question is, how does the organization Bais Yaakov, what allowed somebody to call themselves a Bais Yaakov school? Or even today, what allows them to call themselves Bais Yaakov school?
I think you don't even know what a good question that is. Or maybe you do know. Maybe you do know. So it's a very good question, partly because this is the thing about, which archives have the most reliable information. And in some ways, the most professional archives of Bais Yaakov are actually in New York, the Joint Distribution Committee, which was part of what was supporting Bais Yaakov. And so the Bais Yaakov is sending the numbers to the JDC, and how reliable those numbers are, some are more reliable than others. In other words, this is fundraising, how much is publicity, how much is... So we don't have perfect numbers. So the other question is, what counts as a Bais Yaakov? That was the other thing. So one thing you should know right now is that there's no central Bais Yaakov office anymore. Anyone can open up a Bais Yaakov anywhere, call it Bais Yaakov, and it's a Bais Yaakov. And theoretically, and because there's no central office, there was a central office that seems to have survived until maybe 1980 or something like that. And it went out of business for various reasons. But during the interwar period, in the Bais Yaakov journal, there were advertisements as, you may not open a Bais Yaakov without being in contact with us. In other words, people were doing it then too, just opening up Bais Yaakovs. And they opened, they closed, some of them were official, whatever. So the numbers are very squishy, but it was at least probably the most reliable numbers that we have are, it's somewhere between 23,000 and 40,000 by 1939. And even if it's 23,000, which it's almost certainly is more, it was still the biggest of the independent Jewish school systems. I know that was probably more than you wanted.
I looked this morning, I think in 1937, there were close to 40,000 students.
Where did you look?
In the Bais Yaakov school. I was reading Solomon Birnbaum's letter to Liebenson from the Yiddishism in New York. This is the younger, the son, right? And he's correcting an article that he wrote for 1977 with the Yiddishism. And he says, the number is this. That's how I know.
Yeah.
We're going to get as close as you can get. We're going to provide all the possible numbers on the website at some point.
This question might be a little...
Jews don't count, right?
This question probably overdue. I mean, I'm probably asking a question out of ignorance. We keep hearing about the Birnbaum collection of all these letters and all these great, archives that could be given to the university. Can you give us some examples? What are in those letters? What makes it so valuable? What's in there?
Where do we begin? How much
question
time do you have?
Well, that's a question for you.
Okay, first of all, every letter and every archive, if it's to the Joint Distribution Committee, it's we need money. If it's anybody else, it's sorry, I know I have owed you a letter for a very long time. They all start like that. But mostly with a letter. So the letters are all kinds of things. So there's 2 letters from Sara Schenirer. One of the letters is, she says to Solomon Birnbaum, here's my article. It's probably her famous article called Yiddish and Yiddishkeit, which is the Bais Yaakov Manifesto. And by the way, I don't know if I've ever talked about this with KALMAN. Part of what could be called the Bais Yaakov Yiddishism, I know they wouldn't use that word, is that everybody needs to have a Jewish name. which they didn't all have. So it wasn't just slang away. But she says, here's my article. So this is the Orthodox Manifesto on behalf of Yiddish by Sarah Schenirer. And she says, and I'm sorry I probably didn't use the correct spelling that you tell everybody to use, because I'm already old and I don't understand these things.
Okay.
I think that's very interesting. That Sarah, oh, sorry.
I understand that that's Sarah Schenirer that is in there, but you're talking about a worldwide interest, which means not only the Orthodoxy, which means there's got to be things in there which have a secular interest also. I'm trying to figure out what exactly is in there for the secular interest.
Yes, Kalman can tell you.
I'll give you a sort of brief survey. I mean, David probably knows this by heart. For anyone interested in Zionism, there's Theodor Herzl and the other major figures of Zionism. For anyone interested in Yiddish, you've got everyone who was a player in the Yiddish world. For anyone interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's all there. You've also got Einstein, a small name, Martin Buber, the philosopher. You've got all the major intellectual, cultural figures of the 20th century Jewish life, plus plenty of non-Jewish important figures are there as well. David has a list, and we can show you the list, and you'd be amazed as the list goes on for pages of names that are household names, major figures in pretty much every political, cultural, intellectual, and artistic movement in modern European and Jewish history are present in this collection.
Give us an example of something really interesting.
My interests are rather skewed. So what's really interesting, I'm trying to think of some of the non-Jewish scholars who wrote to him, psychologists and other people, political figures. I mean, it's a little bit hard. I sort of like mentioned the ones that come off the tip of my tongue. But I mean, I'd be happy to show you a list afterwards. We can go online. Actually, I've got a document on my computer. I can show you later, and you'd be amazed by the names on this list.
Just a follow-up comment for Dr. Seidman. I happen to be from Antwerp, okay? So my sister went to Bais Yaakov of Antwerp, and they actually at the 100 years anniversary of the school, and it's as an aside, the school there is not called just Bais Yaakov, it's called the Sodatura Bais Yaakov. I went to Sodatura, so it's considered in one name actually, the Sodatura Bais Yaakov, which was an arm of the boys' school. And at the 100 years anniversary of the school, they published an extensive book with every single student in there, every address that was in there. And it's very interesting that the principal, which I knew personally, he was still alive in my days, his name was Sanctorum, and he actually saved children by himself in World War II. He's a big guy, he's actually in Yad Vashem as one of the Chassidim Soya. And in his office, he had carved out a hole where the main shul, which was around the corner from the school, if everybody's been Antwerp, the main shul in Antwerp is around the corner from the school. They had taken all the Sefer Torah from there, and he had hidden it in the wall and plastered over the wall. And those Sefer Torah survived the war. And he's in Yad Vashem today, just as an aside.
Not an aside at all. This is the meat. Please, if you wouldn't mind being interviewed by me, and I would love to see a copy of that book. So I'm imagining it's the 100th anniversary of yahrzeit.
There's actually students in Toronto.
1896 it was in 1996 is what you're talking about.
1996, that's right. The school started
In 1896.
Before Sara Schenirer was even.
Absolutely.
Then it changed into Bais Yaakov.
And then it's changed to Bais Yaakov in 1933.
There are students here in Toronto that went to the school in the 1950s. Mrs. Gellis,
That's right.
they all went to school there.
So anybody who doesn't mind, so we have where's CHAYA right here. CHAYA can interview her or you know, that, I would love to see a copy of that book from
That book they was
1996.
published, yeah. It's available. It's available from the author.
Yes, thank you. Oh.
Oh yeah, we're
It's your grandchildren.
yeah, we share grandchildren.
We're all really related.
Are there
We're all
any other
sort of
questions?
related. Some more than others. Well, thank you for
Okay,
that.
but any question? What, do I go to the mic or I'll hold the baby?
And her brother.
I'm sorry,
married
just, you know.
to the daughter of Rabbi Stefanski.
Ah,
Another connection.
yeah.
Rabbi Stefanski.
I may have missed it, but I wanted to hear maybe more from CHAYA.
about the history of Bais Yaakov and Toronto. I feel like you skipped over it very superficially. I heard you talk about Chaim.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned like a high school.
Yeah.
Was there an elementary? When did that happen?
Okay.
How did Bais Yaakov? We know where it is now. Right. Stop where Bais Yaakov that you have. But how did it start? We all know it's Chaim, but what was what was yeah. So I actually have my notes.
my mother is here now. She's one of the first graduating classes of
Oh wow, okay. So yeah, my grandmother as well was, I believe, one of first grade 10. I think maybe better. I'd love to talk to you afterwards. I don't want to go into the whole thing now, which is why I sort of skated over that part. Yeah. So sorry. It was great. So Chaim was existing at that point. I don't know if I mentioned that it was originally an afternoon school. It transitioned to having a day school on Viewmount. At that point, so there was a grade 9 sort of on and off for both boys and girls. That was sort of like depending on the year, depending on whether they had kids. And one year they decided to have take, I think there were 2 girls in grade 9 that year, and combine the grade 9 and grade 10 to try and start a high school, which was in that house next door to Chaim at the time. And honestly, like the gaps between that first initial house and it sort of grew. It was actually 1957, I believe, was when they bought. No, that doesn't make sense. Sorry, because it didn't exist yet. Could it have been 1967? I don't know. It was quite quickly after that initial first class that they bought the building on Lawrence, which has since been renovated. And there's actually on the Ontario Jewish Archive has some really amazing photos of this delegation of visitors who came to see the new school and the pool, which is still a big part of it. There's this really amazing photo of
66.
1966.
Those pictures are from 1966.
Oh, the pictures are from 1966. So thank you.
On the website, don't forget to go
Yeah,
to the website.
Yeah, the website's amazing. You should all check out the website.
Started before the elementary school.
The high school? No. Oh,
Yeah.
the Bais Yaakov Elementary School. Oh, yeah, the Bais Yaakov Elementary School was long after. Which also, this is all coming to the website very soon, and you should all check out the website. It's incredible, and it's getting more incredible every day. So definitely a plug for that. Thanks for the reminder. So yeah. Oh, sorry. Were you asking about Bais Yaakov Elementary School?
Well, I guess both, because there was a Jewish day school, Chaim.
Yes.
And then I guess there was, Chaim never had a high school, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So
So
when
Bais
somebody
Yaakov
graduated from Chaim, they either went to public school or they started this Bais Yaakov high school.
Exactly.
But then it sounds like there was like a movement to sort of get the grade younger as an alternative to Chaim.
So I don't know that I would. So my research has been focused mostly on the high school, but I wouldn't link necessarily Bais Yaakov Elementary School to Bais Yaakov High School in that way that you're describing as like Bais Yaakov High School being like we should have an elementary school as well, because they are independent institutions. And like I said, my focus has been mostly the high school, but my impression is that the elementary school kind of follows the same pattern that I was describing about high school, where you start with only like a community that only being able to sustain one school. And then as the community grows, people being able to open community schools. And again, I wouldn't link the high school, Bais Yaakov High School to Bais Yaakov Elementary School, and I don't know that that's recommended.
If I can, so
Please.
I would say it's fine.
Yeah.
But, and I fed in our, at the time, our baseline class fed into open or Bais Yaakov High School. And when we came to Bais Yaakov High School, the equivalent class, a small class of 12 girls came from the Bais Yaakov. So, and I think it was fairly new then. What would that be?
So it's pretty recent. Okay, we're gonna get all this figured out.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
So yeah, I can fill in a bit too. In 1970, when I moved to Toronto, Bais Yaakov Elementary went up to grade 1. So that's when they just started grade 2, my assistant teacher there. In addition to that, they had in the Yesodot Torah boys school, they had 2 classes, basically for old rifleman's class,
That's
class
right.
and
Then they
high
started, right.
And my age was just like in between. So WEISER Reichner wanted his 2 daughters not to be named CHAYA, and he did this.
Right, and
he started
it. They started it, yeah.
In the Yesodot Torah, it was on Lawrence Avenue.
Really?
Yeah. And so, yeah, eventually, when they bought the school building on Stormont, so then it maybe went up to grade 3 or 4, and then that little cohort, the older girls joined up.
That's so interesting. There's actually this pattern.
Crowdsourced.
Yeah, there's a pattern of girls' schools developing sort of as these extensions of boys' schools and then breaking off. Actually, interestingly, there's one fun story I'll just mention quickly that in I think it was Chicago, the reverse happened where there was a community school and then there's a Swedish Rebbe, son of a Rebbe there who wanted a Bais Yaakov for his daughters, and he happened to not have any sons of that age. But at some point, people were like, "Hey, we want our sons to have this education." So the Bais Yaakov opened a sister school for boys. So there's a certain age of boys from Chicago who went to Bais Yaakov before that school went off and became its own thing. It's just a funny anecdote.
I saw a newspaper article about Bais Yaakov, and I found that so confusing.
Yeah.
So thank you for explaining
Yeah,
that.
it's really fun fact. But sorry, was there something? Yeah, so that's an interesting pattern. But
Yeah, because he didn't have boys, he had the girls for
Yeah,
his
but there's
so he
one-
needed a school for the
His
girls,
time was
right?
too Zionistic.
Right.
He wanted-
Yeah, and also
And they started.
Believe it or not, I went there
and
because when I went to
he
Toronto,
started it.
It's time said there was no room for me. They didn't accept me.
Really? Yeah, so that's part of the pattern, right? It's growing. And actually, the Ontario Jewish Archive has, I was reading last night, this article from the Toronto Star from, I think, 1974 about Bais Yaakov Elementary School, which was very new at the time, and how they were becoming recognized by the government and stuff. It's a cute article. You guys should look it up. Or I should have brought it, but it's a lot of fun. So yeah, so I think you're right, it was in the early 70s. It was, and it did mention the Reichner, so I think, yeah, but definitely
That's why it was
more to
newsworthy.
say. Yeah, there's a little more to it, but there's definitely more to say. Again.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanna thank you really for a wonderful presentation. We look forward to more. And it's wonderful all the towns we have in our own city. We don't know, as you were saying.
That's right.
Thank you very much. And as you continue on the wonderful project. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful week.
Come
and,
to the conference
enjoy your
tomorrow.
well. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.